meaning-making process, and they can be used just as strongly as reality. In fact, beliefs, and the interesting things about beliefs is that they can defy reality. People will act according to a belief even though the reality is pointing the opposite way. For example, one of the classic examples I use of a belief is from the annals of abnormal psychology, where there was a guy who believed he was a corpse and he wouldn't work or do anything, and the psychiatrist kept trying to convince him that he wasn't a corpse. And one of the arguments he used, he said, well, do corpses bleed? And the guy says, no, corpses don't bleed. All the bodily functions have stopped. And that's because, see, this guy wouldn't get up. They had to force feed him, all this kind of stuff. He wouldn't do anything because he claimed he was a corpse. So the psychiatrist said, okay, I'd like to try a little experiment here. Let me prick you with a pin and we'll see if you bleed. The guy says, well, there's not much I can do about it. Go ahead, I'm a corpse, you know. Do it. So the psychiatrist carefully, puts an alcohol swab on his finger and pokes him with a pin, and the guy starts to bleed. He looks at it in total amazement. He says, I'll be damned, corpses do bleed. Now, what this says is that the belief is a higher level than the reality. And while that may seem humorous in this context, I've seen the same principles working in contexts where people have serious illness, terminal illness. I'm already dead. What difference does it make? Nothing that I do will make a difference. You notice something, oh, look it, this happened. This looks like it's going in a positive direction. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess somebody who's going to die in a month can have that happen, or can feel energy, or can do this or that. What happens is people build the belief, and even evidence to the, physical evidence to the contrary doesn't change the belief. And that's why I'm saying the interesting thing about beliefs is that they are what categorize reality. Reality doesn't determine beliefs. Beliefs more often determine reality. So this chains of meaning then is one way of doing it. I say means that, means that. Oh, by the way, one of the reasons I brought that up is because if you want to deal with a belief, you all know that trying to challenge a belief with nice, cold, hard reality doesn't work very well. You have somebody who's thought something for 20 years, you're not going to be able to use cold, hard reality to change their mind. So you have to deal with a belief on its own level. And you might find, for example, that using some completely crazy thing, like I was saying, well, because NLP is dangerous, which means it's risky, which means it's necessary to take risks in order to survive, then NLP is necessary for survival. That amazing thing is that might do you 1,000 times more good, 1,000 times faster than if you try to really argue with the person about how NLP really is this way and that way, and let me show you, and because that's not the level at which this belief is occurring. And so addressing it at its own level, which may seem completely silly or illogical, actually can do, this is what we're saying about an internal dialogue that tells you something silly. Well, fight fire with fire. The basic principle of NLP is pacing and leading. If I argue with it, I'm not going to do anything about it. Let's go to the one of chains of causes. Now, chains of causes become interesting because here you're going to find that, you notice there's two little strategies there. One is that if A causes B, it causes a C, then changing A will automatically cause C. So somebody says, well, I'm learning disabled. And I say, well, learning disabilities are caused by the lack of ability to be able to mentally grasp a particular subject. And the ability to mentally grasp a particular subject is caused by your ability to use your senses, say to visualize. Therefore, if you learn to visualize, you won't be learning disabled anymore. Okay, so I go, learning disability is caused by lack of organization, mental organization, which is determined by your ability to, say, visualize well. So therefore, if I teach you to visualize well, by the domino effect, the other thing will change. And that is a very, very powerful strategy. So you go, and this is where, for example, Harold, when you're going, this is caused by that, is caused by that. Well, I might find one here that I know is real easy to change. I change that one, and it pulls the rug out from under all of the rest of the stuff. It follows it. And that's the kind of thing that can also create lots of change quickly using that particular strategy. So in a sense, rather than to do a little sleight of mouth here, rather than feel confused when a person starts chaining back, you should feel lucky, because all you do is you find the one here that you can change, and everything else will, I mean, it'll be like a domino effect forward. If I can change this one that causes all these other beliefs, that becomes a real powerful leverage.
So their mind will sequence it out. You don't have to do that part.
You can do it for them, but it's usually better to let them do it. Besides, it's neat to watch the four-tuple when that happens. They go, that kind of thing, where you can see all these little nuts and bolts and things starting to fall together and fall apart and stuff. It's kind of interesting. All right, the other one for context reframing is that if I have let's say somebody's focusing on a negative thing, like, oh, I'm not an organized person. I can say, well, being disorganized comes from your caring so much about other things that are really important in life, and besides, being disorganized also allows you to be able to understand and to realize that you can cope with things even when there's no organization. Therefore, being disorganized might actually be a good resource, because it comes from a positive, it comes from this caring, and it leads to a positive. It leads to you being able to handle situations that are unstructured. So therefore, it may actually be a positive thing in context. So once again, the pattern here is, if somebody's focusing on a negative, I'm learning disabled. And I say, well, you're learning disabled because your interests or your thoughts are about things that have to do with things other than academic subjects. And besides, being learning disabled will cause you to have to come up with other creative strategies for getting by, like Einstein, who was supposedly dyslexic or something. So therefore, being learning disabled may be a resource. So what I'm saying is, I take the negative, and if I can show that the negative comes from a positive cause and is leading to a positive cause, then in context it doesn't seem so bad. And by the way, it's not to get the person to go, oh, well, thank goodness I'm learning disabled necessarily. It's, again, to open up their way of thinking about it. And I think that becomes important, because it, again, starts to rearrange stuck points in your own thinking. If you can perceive, it's one of the things we do is, you take somebody who's obsessive about it, they're all concerned because they're obsessive about it, and you point out how being obsessive is a great thing when it comes to doing your taxes on time. All of a sudden, they're not getting down on themselves, they're not feeling bad about themselves. It actually opens up their whole way of thinking about it. So that's another one then. If I put the belief, it's another overall strategy for using these sleight of mouth patterns are, if I can show that something the person perceives as negative is coming from a positive and leading to a positive, all of a sudden that becomes less of a stuck point, less of a block. Comparisons. Comparisons are real simple in that if I can find something, for example, in this one it says, take the metaphor here. If I get a grade B in school, if I compare that B to an A+ grade, well, it's not too good, but if I compare it to a C-, then it's good. And this is the kind of thing where somebody focuses on their problems. For example, I remember seeing a nice little cartoon once. It was real interesting, where the first panel of the cartoon was this woman was complaining to her mother about how her husband snored, kept her awake all night. The next panel was the mother was saying, oh, gee, her husband had passed away. She said,